The West African country of Liberia was founded in 1822. Americo-Liberians are an ethnic group who descended from African Americans mainly from Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida, along with Barbadian settlers, many of whom were freed slaves and their descendants who emigrated to Liberia with assistance from the American Colonization Society, ACS. They were a small but dominant minority who didn't intermarry with indigenous populations until later, in some cases. The country was under Americo-Liberian leadership, and the country had remained stable up until April 12, 1980, when tensions boiled over, and a group of 17 indigenous non-commissioned officers and soldiers of the armed forces of Liberia, led by Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, launched a violent coup in what was viewed as an indigenous uprising against the ruling class of Americo-Liberian class. Most of the powerful old Americo-Liberian families fled to the United States in the 1980s after this assassination, while many of others left behind were killed in conflicts. The early African American settlers did not relate well to the native African inhabitants they first encountered in Liberia due to cultural differences, and soon began to establish a social and economic elite in the country. They retained preferences for Western style of dress, Southern plantation-style homes, American food, Protestantism, the English language, and monogamous kinship practices. Demographically, the Americo-Liberians tended to concentrate in larger cities and towns, while native Africans remained in more poorly developed areas before the two groups started to intermingle in the 20th century. Teehee settler community developed an Americo-Liberian society, culture, and political organization that was strongly influenced by their roots in the American South, as well as the Anglophone Caribbean. The Americo-Liberians based in Monrovia were perceived by other Americo-Liberians as have too great of an influence on national political affairs. Americo-Liberians controlled much of Liberia's political and social institutions. Ruling parties such as the True Whig Party and Masonic Order of Liberia dominated and controlled government. During the presidency of William Tolbert before his assassination coup by an indigenous-led group, he initiated liberal reforms and promoted a program to bring indigenous people into the government. Many other Americo-Liberians accused Tolbert of letting the peasants into the kitchen. Americo-Liberians were known to prefer Western modes of dress, African-American Southern food, and followed American social norms such as monogamous relationships and class structure. Furthermore, contributed to the culinary cuisine of the region by introducing American baking techniques. The Americo-Liberian settlers built towns and cities with architecture reminiscent of American styles. Churches, building, and home featured a unique form of antebellum architecture, and the homes of the elites often resembled American southern plantation homes. Infrastructure projects, including roads and bridges, were also developed following American models. Americo-Liberian weddings follow the traditional Black American or Afro-Caribbean style weddings, in which the bridegroom appears in a lounge suit and the bride in a white wedding dress. The founding of Liberia was motivated by the domestic politics of slavery and race in the United States, as well as by U.S. foreign policy interests. In 1816, a group of white Americans founded the American Colonization Society, ACS, to deal with the problem of the growing number of free blacks in the United States by resettling them in Africa. In 1818, the society sent 2 representatives to West Africa to find a suitable location for the colony, but they were unable to persuade local tribal leaders to sell any territory. In 1820, 88 free black settlers and 3 society members sailed for Sierra Leone. Before departing, they had signed a constitution requiring that an agent of the society administer the settlement under US laws. They found shelter on Cherbourg Island off the west coast of Africa, but many died from malaria. The British governor allowed the immigrants to relocate to a safer area temporarily, while the ACS worked to save its colonization project from complete disaster. In 1821, a US Navy vessel resumed the search for a place of permanent settlement in what is now Liberia. The American Colonization Society, ACS, dispatched a representative, Dr. Eli Ayres, to purchase land farther north up the coast from Sierra Leone. With the aid of a US naval officer, Lieutenant Robert F. Stockton, Ayres cruised the coastal waters west of Grand Bassa, seeking out appropriate lands for the colony. Stockton took charge of the negotiations with leaders of the Dey and Bassa peoples who lived in the area of Cape Mesurado. At first, the local leaders were reluctant to surrender their people's land to the strangers, but were forcefully persuaded, some accounts say at gunpoint, to part with a 36-mile-long and 3-mile-wide strip of coastal land for trade goods, supplies, weapons, and rum worth approximately $300. The Cherbourg Island group moved to this new location, and other blacks from the United States joined them. The local tribes continually attacked the new colony, and in 1824, the settlers built fortifications for protection. In that same year, the settlement was named Liberia and its capital Monrovia, in honor of President James Monroe, who had procured more US government money for the project. On April 25, 1822, the survivors of Cherbourg Island arrived at Cape Mesurado and began to build their settlement. With the wavering consent of the new immigrants, the American Colonization Society governed the colony through its representative. In time, however, some colonists objected strenuously to the authoritarian policies instituted by Jehudi Ashman, a Methodist missionary who replaced Ayres as the ACS governing representative. Such disagreements created tensions within the struggling settlement. Believing that the colonial agent had allocated town lots and rationed provisions unfairly, a few of the settlers armed themselves and forced the society's representative to flee the colony. The disagreements were resolved temporarily when an ACS representative came to investigate the colony's problems and persuaded Ashmun to return. Steps were initiated to spell out a system of local administration and to codify the laws. This resulted, a year later, in the Constitution, Government, and Digest of the Laws of Liberia. The settlement that had been called Christopolis was renamed Monrovia after the American president James Monroe, and the colony as a whole was formally called Liberia. The Maryland State Colonization Society established its colony in Cape Palmas, Liberia. Virginia and Mississippi also established Liberian colonies for former slaves and free blacks. The colonies established by the Virginia Colonization Society, the Quaker Young Men's Colonization Society of Pennsylvania, the Mississippi settlement at the mouth of the Seneca River, and the American Colonization Society merged as the Commonwealth of Liberia and claimed control over all settlements between Sestos River and Cape Mount. Other colonization societies sponsored by individual states purchased land and sent settlers to areas near Monrovia. In 1838, most of these settlements, with up to 20,000 people, combined into one organization. The Commonwealth adopted a new constitution and a newly appointed governor in 1839. Former Virginian Joseph Jenkins Roberts, a trader and successful military commander, was named the first lieutenant governor and became the first African American governor of the colony after the appointed governor died in office, 1841. The Americo-Liberian colonist later voted for independence in 1846. Today, about 5% of the population of Liberia is descended from these settlers, while many local indigenous groups are biologically mixed with the Americo-Liberian ethnic group, in which some acknowledge while others don't.